All right, everyone. The Gospels we read immediately after Easter every Sunday were to do with the direct apparitions of Jesus after his resurrection. But now these Sundays that prepare us for the Ascension and for Pentecost, approaching fast, are more to do with meditations on allowing us to see the implications of this resurrection in our life. How do we live of the power of the resurrection, as St. Paul says, in our lives every day? And in this sense, the Gospel of today, John 15, speaks very powerfully on how to live of discipleship. At least that's what it says to me. Discipleship is how can we be united with Christ like the vine is with the branches so that we can carry forth fruit. And a few years ago in our parish here, we started what we call parish evangelization cells. And the image we took for the ideal parishioner, the ideal Catholic, the ideal Christian, the ideal community was an apple tree. And the question we would ask is, what's the fruit of an apple tree? And usually you go, an apple? And wrong. Actually, the fruit of an apple tree is another apple tree. And as a Christian, we're called to bear fruit and to bring forth life in others, to bring forth other apple trees, to bring forth other disciples once we become a disciple ourselves. And that's why I'd like to just meditate a little bit today on discipleship in the light of Easter. You will have noticed that the backdrop to today's gospel is the Acts of the Apostles. And actually it's read every day since Easter. And it's the only book that we actually do that, where for a whole season, every year, we read it every day. Even the Gospels every 3 years. So why so much emphasis on the Acts of the Apostles? Why is it so important? Well, I think when it comes to discipleship, it really is precious, because you'll have noticed in the Catholic Church for the last 25, 30 years, since John Paul II, we speak about a new evangelization, a new springtime in the church. And if we want to rediscover the source and the strength behind a new springtime in our church, we have to go back to the first springtime, which was the Acts of the Apostles. And what was the source of their strength, of their dynamic growth, and of their dynamic discipleship? This early church was so dynamic that in chapter 17, the Acts of the Apostles, one city said, "Here are the ones that are turning the world upside down." Wouldn't that be lovely if we were known as people who were turning the world upside down? St. Luke is the author of Acts of the Apostles, and he's actually the author as well of the Gospel of Luke. It was initially one book, but these books mirror each other's. What happened to Jesus, if you notice, the structure happens exactly to the church as well. And Luke loves this method of mirroring, whether it be Paul mirroring Peter, whether it be Mary's experience of the Annunciation mirrors the experience of the early apostles. At Pentecost, the same words are used for the descent of the Holy Spirit upon her and upon the church. But we see, like in Luke, is like the bridegroom, and the Acts is like the bride. We are the church, and what Christ went through, we went through, and we will go through. But what I find very powerful is that it's more than just being a student. For Luke, the message you get from Acts of the Apostles is to be a disciple is to mirror Jesus. As if to say, Jesus is saying to you, I see in you the capacity to be just like me. And how do we mirror Jesus in the world today? The Acts of the Apostles contains 4 key words that help us understand how the early church and how we can be vehicles of God's love in the world today. The first one is power. The second one is joy. The third one is boldness. And the fourth one is the word to be witnesses. Acts chapter 1 verse 8 is a seminal line in the sense that it contains within it the whole structure of the Acts of the Apostles. And the first word is, you will receive a power. And the word used here is dunamis. In English, it gives words like dynamo or dynamite. It's a very dynamic word. And this dunamis has been given to us, the same dunamis, in our baptism. We don't always use it or tap into it, but this dunamis, we have it. And we're called to tap into the same dunamis, the same power that the first disciples tapped into. The 2 fruits of this dunamis we see immediately in the Acts of the Apostles and right through the whole book is joy and boldness. The first one, joy, it's not a joy that's dependent on outside events. It's an inner event. The joy of knowing that we are infinitely loved by God. And this acts as like a thermostat. No matter what the temperature be outside, It just remains always constant because it's a joy that comes from an inner event rather than an outer event. And we can see this joy in the apostles, in the early church. Even when they are beaten up and persecuted for their faith, they rejoice. So you can see this overpouring of joy in their lives. The second fruit of this power is the word parousia, boldness, or a holy boldness. And what is this parousia? Well, the Catechism of the Catholic Church gives us a really good definition. It says parousia is a straightforward simplicity, a filial trust, a joyous assurance, a humble boldness, and the certainty of being loved. And boy, do we need that in today's world. The fourth and final image or word that goes right through the Acts of the Apostles is the word witness. From chapter 1, verse 8, you will receive a power, dunamis, to be my witnesses. Now, the word witness comes from the Greek term martus, and that's where we get the word martyr, to show us that there is like a cost to discipleship. Not everyone wants to hear the good news of Christ, but we must still be faithful witnesses. And the idea of martus is not just the idea of giving your physical life. There is the extraordinary example of martyrdom, but there's also at its heart it means making your life a gift to the other. Now, especially in this time of COVID, difficult, extraordinary time, to look for every opportunity to serve and to reach out to others. That's where we are called to be witnesses and martyrs. And that's what Jesus does on the cross. He makes a full, free, fruitful, and faithful gift of his life on the cross and asks us to do likewise. One last little point about Luke is that in the Acts of the Apostles, he's constantly trying to get us from being a spectator to a participant. If you notice with Luke, he's trying to draw us into the story because he himself was drawn into the story. Before chapter 16, the Acts of the Apostles, Luke uses the pronoun they went with Paul here and there. After chapter 16, it's we went with Paul. And we can see that Luke has been drawn into the story, and the rest of the Acts is trying to draw us in, where it becomes our story as well. And the Acts of the Apostles ends all of a sudden, there's like an ellipsis, ... as if to say, this same power is given to you, the joy, the boldness, so you too can become witnesses.